Hello everyone, in this video I'll be ranking the best wizard multi-class builds in Baldur's Gate 3 on a tier list. Prior to patch 8, a single level dip in the wizard was one of the best ways to multi-class because that gave you the ability to learn things like global invulnerability, the elementals when paired with a full caster. Now, with patch 8, we got ourselves the Bladesinging wizard, which allows you to get an extra attack and retain all the spellcasting abilities that the wizard brings. So this opens up a lot of really cool builds which we'll be exploring in this video. And with the wizard being the only class that uses intelligence for spellcasting, we do run into the issue of spell save DC, which you do have to split your stats. Now, there are a few pieces of gear in the game, like the Helmet of Arcane Acuity, the Gloves of the Battle Mage's Power, which was fixed in patch 8, which gives you upwards of a plus 10 to your spell save DC. So that can kind of get rid of some of the issues with multiclassing. There's also the Hat of Fire Acuity, and you can cast one Scourgeon Ray and end up getting a plus 10 to your spell save DC, which overcomes some of the difficulties of multiclassing. But there's a lot of really cool combinations here. The first we'll be starting off with is the Sorcerer. Now, the Sorcerer is actually a pretty decent multiclass. They're both spellcasters, so you retain your full spellcasting levels. This means that you can learn spells from scrolls. If you want to do a cold damage focused Draconic Sorcerer, one of the best ways to actually do this is to add in the Bladesinging Wizard or another subclass of the Wizard, because with that, you also get the ability to learn Otiluke's Freezing Sphere and Wall of Ice, which the Sorcerer doesn't have access to. And with the Draconic Bloodline at level 6, you can add your Elemental Ancestor to your damage type. So this does add the Charisma modifier to your spellcasting, which does make this build kind of mad. However, there's the Circle of Intelligence, Gloves of Dexterity, and the Amulet of Constitution or Amulet of Greater Health, which helps you dump one of those stats so that you can kind of overcome that difficulty. But the big thing here with multiclass and the Sorcerer is they're two casters, and you get Quicken Spell from the Sorcerer. So this allows you to cast, if you go with a 6-6 split, you can do Quicken Spell twice per long rest, which does give you some pretty nice options for being able to do some kind of melee spell casting builds. Like if you wanted to go in, attack with your melee attacks twice, and then cast a spell, this is a way that you can do it while retaining your full spellcast progression. Now, I would say the best multi-class would actually be the Shadow Magic Sorcerer, because at level 6, you get the ability to see in darkness from level 3, and then you also get the Shadow Magic Hound, which is another summon that actually is pretty strong, and they go together very well. And with the Bladesinging Wizard, you get the ability to do 2 attacks on top of that, and you can learn the Shadow Blade spell, which gets powered up by Darkness. Darkness actually gives you advantage on your attack rolls, so I know a lot of people hate Shadow Blade, so I'm not going to focus too much on that, but I can't deny it's one of the strongest builds in the game now. And I personally like to take the Shadow Magic Sorcerer up to level 11, but if you want to split it with the Bladesinging Wizard, you do get that melee kind of spellcasting combination here that is actually really strong. Also, the Storm Sorcerer is pretty powerful too. You do get the ability to fly as a bonus action without getting hit with opportunity attacks, which is nice. Quicken Spell being the big thing, and you get Create Water, which is also pretty nice. I also like the Draconic Bloodline. If you wanted to do, let's say, a fire damage focused spellcaster melee combo, this would be the way to do it. Wild Magic is also kind of fun too, but not really optimal. My personal preference, Bladesinging Wizard with the Shadow Magic Sorcerer for somewhat of a Nightblade type build, or going with the Draconic Bloodline if you want to pick a specific elemental damage type, get that built-in mage armor, and Storm Sorcerer is not a bad choice as well. Again, this is a multi-attribute dependent build, so using things like the Gloves of Dexterity or things like that will help out with this build. I'd have to say, though, the Sorcerer overall is actually a pretty good multi-class because the Sorcerer doesn't get Elementals, the Sorcerer doesn't get Wall of Ice or Otiluke's Freezing Sphere, 2 of the best cold spells in the game. They also fixed the Wall of Ice spell in patch 8, so there's a lot to like about this multi-class. I do think it is pretty powerful. It's not the best, though, but it's still really strong. My preference being 6 levels of Shadow Magic Sorcerer, 6 levels of Bladesinging Wizard. You can also mix in like the Evocation Wizard, things like that, but I personally like getting the option to do melee with spellcasting because it just opens up doors for doing a lot of really cool builds. And the nice thing about Shadow Blade is if you use the Gloves of the Battle Mage's Power, every single melee attack will give you a +2 to your spell save DC. And on top of that, also Booming Blade will also get applied to that. So Booming Blade is another great thing that got added to the game that only further enhances the Bladesinging Wizard, but yeah, I do think that the Sorcerer is a solid A-tier pick here. Next up is the Barbarian. Big issue here is Barbarians cannot spellcast while they rage. It's not that great of a dip, I'll be honest. But there is one really big benefit here. You do get the unarmored defense. So when paired with the Constitution Amulet, this gives you a +6 to your armor class. This doesn't stack with mage armor, but if you're using things like the Robe of the Weave, that gives you a +2 to your armor class. You get your 10 10 plus 2 plus 6, that's 18 armor class already before looking into things like the Bladesinging, which can add a further 4 to your armor class. So you can be really tanky with just a single level of the Barbarian. Also, what's nice about the Barbarian is if you start with 1 level of the Barbarian, the multi-class, you get Constitution saving throw proficiency. So that's going to give you an additional 4 onto your Constitution saves, which are for holding concentrations on spells. The only way that I would do a Barbarian split is, again, just a single level dip to give yourself that boost to the armor class. Yeah, I don't see a 6-6 split being very optimal here or anything else. I've tried a few different ways and they just don't mesh well because the Barbarian, you can't spellcast. So that is obviously a big issue there, as the Wizard is all about spellcasting. So if you wanted to do this multi-class, you could go with a single level Barbarian, a single level, and then 11 levels of the Wizard or something along the lines of that. You'd even do like 1 level of the Barbarian, 2 levels of the Fighter to give yourself action surge, which is not a bad thing to have, but I don't think that this is a great combination overall, and I would have to say probably around B tier. There's better options to go with. The only reason I'm going to put in the B tier and not roleplay tier is because if you just want a single level dip, getting the Constitution armor is actually very good for survivability. You can make your Wizard extremely tanky this way and get the Constitution saving throw proficiency. This best multi-class with the Bladesinging Wizard, but yeah, any other option, you're just going to be doing it for the increased armor class. Next up is the Bard. The Bard's an interesting one. You could go with the Lore Bard, because the Lore Bard actually brings a lot, because you get the cutting words here, which can basically debuff the enemies very nicely. And the College of Lore will get its magical secrets at level 6. Why is this important? Well, this allows you to take Hunger of Hadar or Spirit Guardians with a Wizard multiclass. Yes, you could do those things by multiclassing the Warlock, but with a Warlock, you don't get full spell casting progression. And with the Cleric, it's a nice choice. Honestly, I like the Cleric a lot, but that's what we'll get to in a moment here. The College of Lore is nice, though, if you wanted to kind of have a charisma-based spell-casting hybrid with, again, Bladesinging Wizard, I think would be the best choice here. Bladesinging Wizard doesn't really play as nicely with the College of Swords either. And I think that the best multi-class, if you're looking for a Bard, is to take 10 levels of this and 2 levels of the Paladin. I did do a best multi-classes for the Paladin video, so you can check that out. I'll link that in the description in the comments. I think that the College of Lore is probably the best. With the College of Glamour also being not a bad choice, you get the Mantle of Inspiration and then the Mantle of Majesty to be able to do bonus action commands. But you can also grab the Band of the Mystic Scoundrel in Act 3, and that gives you bonus action spells as well. So, College of Lore, likely the best for the cutting words here. The 1d6 penalty to ability checks, saving throws is nice. Just one big disclaimer here. Using cutting words eats up your reaction. So this means if you have counterspell, which the Bard does not naturally get, you're not able to counterspell a turn. And counterspell is something you want to save yourself for. So as nice as this is, I don't think the Bard is the greatest multi-class here overall. I think that there's much better options if you wanted to do a multi-class. So I like the Bard personally, but I do think that it does have its downsides when it comes to multiclassing. And I think the Bard multiclass is better with charisma-based classes anyways, like the Bard Lock, which is a Bard and a Warlock, or the Bard and the Paladin. I just think that this one is something that is a little bit left. Not a great choice overall. So I'm going to put this one into the B tier here. Barbarian, I think, actually brings a little bit more to the table just with the big boost to the armor class. You could do a Bard mix, but if you're going College of Lore to take Hunger of Hadar and Spirit Guardians, both those are concentration. You can only use one at a time. If you want Spirit Guardians, the Cleric is much better. If you want Hunger of Hadar, if you're outside honor mode, the Warlock's better. But if you're in honor mode, this would be the way to get Hunger of Hadar. Although it's not the best spell in the game, I'll be honest. There's better ones that we could get our concentration on. So yeah, I don't think it's the absolute best choice. I'll be honest with y'all. Next up is the Monk. Now, the Monk is one that multi-class is really weird. With the Monk, you do get that bonus armor class, but it has to be your Wisdom modifier. So unless you're running with an 18 Wisdom, Mage Armor is going to be the better choice here. You also get bonus action punches. I don't want to see Gale punching. I don't think he's that great at it, so that's something as well. The Monk multi-class is best with the Rogue Thief for the extra bonus action, or with a Barbarian for the better armor class and the extra survivability during Rage, or the Fighter for action surge. There's a lot of better Monk multi-classes than going with the Wizard. The Way of the Four Elements actually doesn't even play nicely with this because, yeah, they don't use spell slots. They use your key points, and the Way of the Four Elements is very not great with its key economy. So the Monk is okay overall. I think it's one of the strongest classes in the game, but this is not a multi-class that does it very well. And I actually think I'm going to put this into the roleplay tier just because this multi-class just doesn't have any synergy to it at all. As mentioned, you'd have to get your wisdom up to 18, which means you have to invest either your Hag's Hair or by taking an ability score improvement to get a better bonus than Mage Armor could provide you. So there's no defense bonus here like the Barbarian brings with his Constitution-based armor class. So yeah, the Monk is roleplay. Also, it just doesn't work together. So we want to get on to the next one, which is a very solid multi-class. The Cleric. Full spellcaster, doesn't get an extra attack. But if you went with the War Domain, you get a bonus action attack, which is pretty nice. So this can pair well with the Bladesinging Wizard because you keep full spellcasting progression and you get some melee bonuses as well. My personal favorite, I posted this, a couple different builds related to this, and I think it's one of the strongest in the game now with Patch 8, the Tempest Domain. The reason the Tempest Domain is so good is you get a reaction, so we get a damage option here. Again, don't want to always be using a reaction on damage when we have things like Counterspell, which are much better for protecting the team and keeping us from going down. You can also multi-class this with the Death Domain Cleric if you wanted to go all in on a Necromancy build. I actually really like this build. I posted one recently with, not the Bladesinging Wizard, I know it's been one that I've focused on a lot because it just opens things up so much, but if you go with the Necromancer Wizard, you get 3 times the spell's level back from casting a spell if it takes out an enemy, if it's a Necromancy spell. 2 times otherwise. So if you did Cone of Cold, you can get yourself 10 health back. But if you do Circle of Death, you can get 18 health back, which is crazy. And on top of all of this, the Death Domain can benefit from, at level 6, you ignore resistances to necrotic damage. So this means if you multi-class the Cleric, Death Domain 6 levels with 6 levels of the Necromancer Wizard, you get the ability to raise 2 zombies from the Necromancer Wizard, and you also ignore resistance to necrotic damage. And then the best part about all this, you can learn from a scroll, Circle of Death, cast that, and with the Staff of Cherished Necromancy, if you take out an enemy, you get its Life Essence, which allows you to keep casting Circle of Death, ignoring resistances, and healing you for 18 every single time it takes out an enemy. This is an immortal build, and it's actually really strong because prior to this, necrotic damage sucks in the game because everything in its dog resists it. But if you add in this, you can ignore those resistances. You get all the nice benefits of being a Cleric too. So you can get the Necrotic Spirit Guardians upcasted and, you know, run around casting Circle of Death, taking out everybody. This is one of the most fun Necromancer builds in the game. Life Domain can actually make a pretty solid healer multi-class if you wanted to take like Evocation Wizard. I really like the Bladesinging Wizard because this gives you melee options on top of the healing options. I'm also a huge fan if you want to do a fire focus build in Protector, or light, like radiating orbs, the Light Domain, because you get the Warding Flare and at level 6, improved Warding Flare, which gives disadvantage on an attacker, making it much less likely your teammates are going to get hit. This does use your reaction as well, so just a heads up again, you got to choose between using your reaction on the melee attacks or on spellcasting with Counterspell. If you go with the War Domain, you get all the nice benefits of this, which uses Channel Divinity for a +10 to your attack roll, and this can apply to your teammates as well. So it's nice if you wanted like a melee attacker support kind of multi-class. And the War Domain also gets heavy armor proficiency. In the Bladesong, you can't really use that, but you don't have to always be in Bladesong. Some of the multi-classes with the Bladesinging Wizard are interesting if you don't use it. I personally prefer it myself because that +3 or 4 to armor class is really nice. But the one I really want to focus on is the Tempest Domain. This is the strongest multi-class because, again, you get the reaction, but it's the level 2 ability, the Destructive Wrath. When you roll thunder or lightning damage, you can use your Channel Divinity to roll the maximum damage instead. Why this is so strong? Well, the Tempest Domain doesn't get Chain Lightning, the strongest lightning spell in the game, which does a average of 80 damage if you use the Destructive Wrath. You don't miss with that, and or you don't roll bad damage, you roll the maximum amount. So if you have Create Water set up, which you learned from the Cleric, you can do a guaranteed 160 damage. That is crazy. And this is just a really useful option because the Tempest Domain gives you heavy armor. So if you want to wear heavy armor, you can. But if not, you get that really crazy damage option. You also get Spirit Guardians again. That's one of the best things about the Cleric. So you can run around with Spirit Guardians, throwing around Chain Lightnings and using your Channel Divinity to hit 160 damage on 4 targets. Yeah, that is pretty absurd amounts of damage. So it goes without saying, the Cleric is possibly the best multi-class. You don't have to, you can use the Evocation Wizard, you can use the Necromancer, you can use whatever you want to multi-class with the Cleric. My personal favorite is like, kind of like a Thor build, the God of Thunder. You get 6 levels of the Bladesinging Wizard, 6 levels of the Cleric. You get all those benefits of the extra attack. And then at level 6, the Tempest Domain allows you to push enemies when you deal thunder or lightning damage, so you can knock them around with that and it also works with their reaction as well. So it's extremely powerful, and yeah, I think this is one of my new favorite builds in patch 8. If you want to do lightning, this is the way to do it, because you also get the melee attacks and all the spellcasting benefits. And next up, we have the Druid. Now, the newest subclass added with patch 8 actually works well with the Bladesinging Wizard, and actually all of the subclasses for the Wizard, but the Circle of the Stars allows you to go into your starry form, and the Dragon, when paired with the Bladesinging Wizard, is almost impossible to lose its concentration, and here's why. So, if you're in your Bladesinging Wizard form, if you have a 6/6 blade, you get a +3 to your Constitution saving throws. If you're in your starry form Dragon, the lowest you can roll to hold your concentration is a 10, which massively boosts up your ability, because like that's taking off half of the worst rolls and removing them. So enemies have to do a lot of damage, and you just have to be really unlucky to lose your concentration at this point. I actually think that the best way to multiclass this is to take the 2 levels of the Druid, so you get your multiclass, and then 10 levels of the Wizard. The Bladesinging Wizard gets the Song of Defense, so you can take a spell slot. Let's say you get attacked for 30 damage. And you expend a level 5 spell slot. That'll reduce it by 25 damage, so you only take 5 damage, helping out with your overall concentrations as well. Pretty interesting. The Druid also has a pretty good spell list too. I personally like to take the Druid to at least level 7 to get the Woodland Being. We can't really do that with this build, so if you do forego a lot of extra stuff that you would get from the Druid. You could potentially go with the Evocation Wizard level 2 and then 10 levels of the Druid, get the extra attack in your wild shape. Moon Druid could work. You keep the full spellcasting progression, so you can learn things like Globe of Invulnerability or really any other spells that you want. The Druid's a pretty solid choice, I would say, overall. I like just personally taking the Moon Druid and then adding in like the Fighter for the weapon proficiencies and the Sorcerer for Armor of Agathis while you're in your forms, but the 2 levels of the Circle of Stars Druid makes it... This actually would be one of the strongest multi-classes to never lose concentration. You could even go a step further and add the Barbarian for the Constitution saving throw proficiency, and then 2 levels of the Druid to get the starry form, and then go into the Blade Song to get that +3 to your overall, or +4 potentially to your saving throws, or to your Constitution saving throws. So you basically will never lose a concentration. It's an interesting choice. Might not be the absolute best, but it's an interesting one. I'd have to say the Druid is another one that's possibly another A-tier pick, somewhere around there. And next up is the Fighter. It's an interesting one because the Fighter really benefits from going to level 11, because that's when they get their improved extra attack, allowing for 3 attacks per action. That's really strong. The Fighter does multiclass pretty well for the most part, but I do think it's a little limited here with the Wizard. You can go the Eldritch Knight and then take a level of the Wizard to learn a few more spells from scrolls. They both share intelligence, their spellcasting stat. Wouldn't say it's really that great, honestly. If you're going to go with it's an option, I guess. I would prefer the Eldritch Knight to go to level 11 and take a single level of the War Cleric for their bonus action attacks. I guess you kind of get that with the War Magic change, or even just going with 11 levels of that with a level of the Sorcerer to give yourself the Armor of Agathis, which is not a bad boost to their survivability. The Fighter is a weird one. If you wanted to go with a split, I don't think that there's an option that works very well for both parties. It would probably be 11 levels of Fighter, 1 level of Wizard, or 11 levels of Wizard, 1 level of the Fighter. You do lose, if you were to take Action Surge, you lose a level 6 spell slot, which is a big ask. At that point, it's not worth the multiclass, in my opinion anyways. So I do think there's a lot to lose here from multiclassing, but they're better off, I would say, split classes. A single level dip of each would be best. Again, the Fighter gets Constitution saving throw proficiency, so it could be a good class to start with. It'll also give you heavy armor proficiency, so if you really wanted that, and their bonus action heal, it's not a bad choice. I just think that the Barbarian actually brings a bit more. As weird as it is, the Barbarian having the ability to not spellcast when you can spellcast while being a fighter. The big thing with the Barbarian is just the single level dip brings a huge bonus to your armor class, especially if you're using the Constitution Amulet, where you don't get that from the Fighter. So you do get a fighting style for the +1 armor class, and you can wear heavy armor. I just think that the Barbarian's a little better. I do like, again, the 11-1 splits, but I don't think that it's the most optimal way to go about multiclassing. So, yeah, it's an alright pick, but I feel like the Barbarian is a little bit better. I might put this one at the bottom of the B tier. Eldritch Knight is really cool, one of my favorite new changes to patch 8, but it itself doesn't really get maximum spell casting, so even multiclassing, it doesn't really add that much. C tier, B tier, you could go C tier. But next is actually an interesting one. Now, in my Paladin tier list, I put the Wizard in the A tier. I actually think the Wizard gets more. There's more to gain for the Wizard here. Now, what's so great about this multiclass? is patch 8 brought again. Bladesinging Wizard, level 10 with the Wizard, and then 2 levels of the Paladin. This gives you level 6 spellcasting progression. You don't learn things like Chain Lightning unless you have a scroll, but that doesn't matter. The big thing is if you're using the Bladesinging Wizard, you can add Divine Smites with the 2-level dip of the Paladin. So this is actually pretty strong because if you, again, take 10 levels, you get that extra attack, you get the Song of Defense. The Wizard or the Paladin also can give you heavy armor proficiency if you start with the Paladin. And then on top of all of that, it's the Divine Smite. You got spell slots to burn on that. And what's great about that is you can use like Shadow Blade, obviously, to get the 4d8 attack. You got a Booming Blade and then a Divine Smite. You can upcast Divine Smites up to level 4 to get the extra damage dies on that. I think the Wizard gains more from adding in the Paladin, so it's really strong. With the Paladin, it's better multiclass, I would say, is actually to add in 10 levels of the Bard, because they get magical secrets, they get you can get hold purse and things like that, and the Flourish is a big thing for the Bard. But the Paladin, I would actually say, is probably another S tier pick. I think it's better in the only reason I'm putting it in the S tier is because of the Bladesinging Wizard. If you take that, 2 attacks, Divine Smites, Shadow Blades, it actually becomes extremely powerful in that regard. Try it out, trust me on that. It's one of the biggest melee classes, I would say, now in patch 8. I like the Bard and the Paladin for this Divine, because you can use a Flourish, a Slashing Flourish, and Divine Smite 2 targets at a time. But with the Wizard, you can do 2 attacks with a Shadow Blade that, again, does 48 of damage, with the Resonance Stone that's doubled for 8d8 potential damage, and then Divine Smite, which can add a 4 or 5d8 of radiant damage, and then Booming Blade, which can add a 3d8 of thunder damage, and you can put your Divine Smites as reactions, so you just do your melee attacks and burn through your spell slots. Yeah, if you're going full caster, the Cleric's better. If you're going melee, the Paladin is just as good, if not better. The split, again, is 10 levels of Wizard, 2 levels of Paladin. So, yeah, it's really strong, in my opinion. Now, the half-caster's ugly brother here is the Ranger. The Paladin adds Divine Smites at level 2. The Ranger, they do give you heavy armor proficiency, so you can get that with the Ranger Knight. You can also learn yourself Beast Tamer for the Fine Familiar. You can get fire damage resistance or poison, 2 of the most common damage types in the game. That's cool and dandy. But level 2 doesn't really give you many major benefits, and it's a wisdom-based class, so if you wanted something like the Ensnaring Strike, you're going to have to sacrifice some points into wisdom to make it work a little bit better. I do think that if you're going to go with a half-caster, the Paladin with the Bladesinging Wizard is just 10 times better in every possible way. The Ranger doesn't bring a lot to the table here. Even if you go with the Gloomstalker Ranger, that's probably the best choice to go with 3 levels of Gloomstalker Ranger, take 6 levels of the Bladesinging Wizard, and then add 3 levels of the Rogue Assassin or Rogue Thief. But then you don't get full spellcasting progression. It just ends up losing something here. And if you take more than 2 levels of the Ranger, you lose out on the level 6 spell slots. So it does have its shortcomings. I think the Ranger is unfortunately one of the worst multi-classes to go with here, because you're going to sacrifice something to get something of lesser or not even equal value. So I'd actually say the Ranger's probably a C tier choice, Gloomstalker being the best choice. But again, if you take 3 levels, you lose level 6 spell slot. That's a high opportunity cost there. It can give you heavy armor proficiency, but so can the Fighter. And the Barbarian, arguably better with their unarmored defense. Next is the Rogue. This is another one that's kind of interesting. The Arcane Trickster is the multi-class that gives you spell slots, but it's a 1/3 caster. So if you take 3 levels of the Rogue to get the Arcane Trickster, you lose out on level 6 spell slots again. You can get the bonus action, but the bonus action from Thief only really benefits those that have a good bonus action use, and the Bladesinging Wizard doesn't really, or any wizard really doesn't have a major benefit to it. This would be another one that I think is just a roleplay tier. The Rogue is great when added to some other martial-based classes and anyone that needs a bonus action, but it's not a sorcerer. Like I've run 9 levels of the Shadow Magic Sorcerer, 3 levels of the Rogue Thief. That's 2 extra quicken spells. There's 2 quicken spells you can do, so that's actually pretty interesting. But with the Wizard, it's another roleplay tier, I'd say. It just doesn't make as much sense as some of the other multi-classes that we got here. So yeah, I'd have to say this is probably roleplay tier. If you guys got any ideas for some good multiclass for Monk and Rogue, let me know. But I just think that they sacrifice way too much to get any benefit from it. But finally, the Warlock. The Warlock doesn't play nice. I like the Warlock because it can add some really cool combinations. But with the Wizard's big benefit is the learning spells from scrolls. So again, if you take the Cleric, you get full spellcasting progression. Same with the Druid and the Sorcerer. The Warlock has packed magic, so if you take 6 levels of Warlock, 6 levels of the Wizard, you can only learn level 3 spells from scrolls. It's good if you want to be charisma based with the new Hexblade Warlock. You could go all in on charisma, but the best would be outside of honor mode if you took 6 levels of the Bladesinging Wizard and then 5 levels of the Pact of the Blade Hexblade. You could then get 3 attacks per action, and then you could use a level 3 Shadow Blade, which would give you a 3d8 of damage. It's not going to be as high as the Paladin multiclass that I mentioned, but it's something, I guess. Yeah, I just feel like if you really want the 3 attacks and Booming Blade and Shadow Blade, go with the Eldritch Knight Fighter. That's probably the better choice there. This isn't the worst combination in the game, but it's also not really the best. The Warlock is interesting. Again, the pack magic really screws it over. You can go with a single level dip, but then if you take like the Fiend or the Hexblade, you really have to use Charisma for your weapon attacks, so that kind of defeats the purpose of multiclassing. The Hexblade's best with like a Paladin or a Bard or something else that just gives it more benefits here. It gives you the ability to see a magical darkness, but there's 3 items in the game that can also do that for you. It just feels like a subclass, multiclass that's best utilized if you're in or outside of honor mode. So with that, I'd have to say it is probably about the B tier at best. And in honor mode, it's roleplay tier. I would never do that. It just doesn't make sense. So in recap here, Cleric obviously has a lot of great options because you get Spirit Guardians with a 6/6 split. You get all the benefits. Like the Clerics really do have lots of great benefits to them. This keeping full spellcasting progression is a big thing. So you got a Cleric that can learn Globe of Invulnerability, one of the best spells for keeping your team alive. This just makes the Cleric better. I also like to take the Cleric up to level 11 too, because it gets Planar Ally, one of the best spells in the game. And the Paladin, as mentioned, 10 levels of the Wizard, 2 levels of Paladin, big booming smites. It's pretty strong. Sorcerer and the Druid are also pretty solid. Circle of the Stars, really any Sorcerer subclass, my favorite being the Shadow Magic. And the Barbarian, single level dip for the armor class. The Bard, it works, but it's probably better to do one of these 4. The Fighter, again, single level dip, doesn't really play nice. It could also be a single level dip with the Wizard into an Eldritch Knight. And the Warlock also doesn't play nice. But let me know your thoughts on the Wizard multiclasses builds in Baldur's Gate 3. Hit the subscribe button below if you haven't already. I hope you have a great day, and we'll catch you all in the next video.